Welcome to Whiskey Watches and Wheels, and this is our post-New Year's show. Guys, Happy New Year's. How's everyone doing tonight?
Happy New Year.
Good.
Fantastic. Well, folks, my name is Matt.
I'm Casey.
I'm James.
And I'm Kevin.
Cool, guys. We have some phenomenal topics tonight, I believe, but let's get rolling with our standard wristwatch check and what's in the cup. Who wants to get us going?
I'll go. Here we go. Going very simple again this week. Just Apple Watch with it has a nice face. I don't know. Kind of modern take.
There you go.
Very
Looks like
simple.
a Movado.
There you go.
Movado. I was just going to say that.
Yep.
Yeah. Let's see here. I'm going with the Seiko again. So during the holiday break, I feel like I have 8 new watches just by adjusting bands and changing out batteries and such. So pulling this baby out, this is my Solar. It is the 2015 Seiko Solar Chronograph SSC 021. So
Nice.
Got this thing up and going. Thank you, eBay, for some batteries.
Mm-hmm.
But I like it. It's a great daily. I think it's got cool little yellow touches, and that's why I have that yellow strap added to it. So,
And it's a weird battery, not one that you can find like.
Yeah, it's a rechargeable battery. So that's where the solar part comes in and how it recharges. So there's a couple tabs on it. You have to line them up when you change the battery out, and it wasn't a problem whatsoever.
Interesting.
I think it was harder to get the back off than it was to change the battery.
Yeah.
Matt,
I had
what you
one
got?
the other day that I was doing, and I was cursing the back. I was giving it everything I could not to mar it up and everything, and I finally got it off. So,
Cool.
Kev, what about you, buddy?
I literally today I just got a Casio A201. It's kind of like, you guys ever seen the movie Blue Thunder with War Snyder? He goes in his, I think it was Trans Am, and hits the little button and like goes through the. It's not that particular model, but it still kind of has the same feature. So it has the. Let's see if I can get it. The little timer that ticks. Tick, 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 tick,
Oh, very cool. Yeah, I like that.
Nice.
So I just won it at an auction and actually lost it. I lost the bid because I forgot to set my alarm clock, and the guy said, "Hey, I've had that happen before, so if you want it, you can have it." So he let me take it, and I just got it in today.
How did that
So-
work? No one else
he
was
just-
bidding on it?
No, there were other people, but the guy had. I was the next top bidder. So and then my father actually gave me another Seiko watch, which I'm in the process of restoring. So I'll probably do some pictures of it. It was his watch that he was in the Navy. He told me it was a 71, but it's actually an 81.
Oh, wow.
And I said they didn't have
only 10 years
digital.
off.
I'm like, they didn't have digital in 71. So we were going back and forth about it. And I had to show him pictures. She's like, no, I'm pretty sure. And I'm like, no, I'm really
I
sure.
think 75 range, 75, 76. I think that's
yeah. Pulsar was like the first digital
Yeah.
one.
And
So I was telling him,
they were like $200 back then in 76 money. You know what I mean?
no, it was $2,000 for the Pulsar.
2000.
Yeah,
Really?
yeah. So yeah, I had to look it up, and I was talking to him about it. But I'm in the process of changing the battery, kind of like you guys. I polished the case a little bit, and I'm actually gonna take it and like take the band and put the what's that called, like the matte finish or the satin
Like
finish on
brush
it.
finish. Yeah, brush
Yeah,
it.
and brush it. And the guy wore this thing like every single day, so I think I'm gonna try to. It was pretty beat up. Try to restore.
Wait, so how are you going to put that back on there with paper? With sandpaper?
No, so you're just sand it with a block, and then you use different grains, and then you use a gray Scotch Brite pad. And that's what we do when I manufacture CNC parts. It kind of gives that. You just have to make sure you're doing it at the same.
Straight.
Yeah. So you go, depending on the band has a lot of nicks, and I'd probably do that with the case. I know how to do it, but I did watch a YouTube video. A guy in England, that's what he does for a living. So I watched. I don't have the guy's name, but I watched it.
Thanks for erasing the history from that watch, though.
Well, it was sitting in the band. It's beat up, and I don't like.
We all know
stuff.
Kevin is not necessarily, and I'm not either. The patina guy. James is the patina guy. We like.
I mean, I just
look
restored
nice.
this 1965 CB77, and I could have drove it in a piece of crap, but no, I wanted to look
Right.
really nice.
So
For those listening at home, we will be posting up photos of all of these watches we're talking about on Instagram, so you can see photos of them there.
So it's in 1975?
The watch?
Yeah.
No, it's an 81.
Oh, it's an 81. Okay.
This one here, I think, is an 85 or 83. The one that I'm wearing is 83, but the one my dad gave me was an 81. And he said it was a 71.
It was 72 Pulsar, as you said, was like $2,100 then. That's like a $16,000 watch now. I mean,
but it was the first. I think they're all gold, and it was just like in red, just the time.
Yep.
That's it. And and then my dad gave me another watch, which I'll show you. It's gold plated. It was my grandfather's, and I'm not going to restore that one because it's really good condition. It's a quartz. It's a lady's watch. My grandfather was like maybe 4'11". Like,
wow.
Yeah, he was a tiny guy, but like pretty.
So you still looked up to him?
Yeah, when I was 3. What are you wearing, Matt?
All right. So I have a brand new acquisition, and I am absolutely in love with this watch. So this is a Seiko speed timer. One of the brand new Seiko speed timers. It's called the Ice Panda. Actually has a ice blue dial with black chronograph. It's from their Prospects line, reference SSC 909. The only thing I'm not in love with is the fact that Seiko's got this thing now. Unless you're getting something from either Grand Seiko with the spring drive, or you're getting something from their
Prospects
5 collection. Yeah, well, the Prospects is all solar now. I mean, and not that I have anything against solar watches. I mean, I have a ton of Citizens that are all Eco Drive. So, but I like automatics. But they just, a lot of them, they're going either more and more just quartz, or their Prospects line is all solar. So, so it's a solar chronograph, 39 millimeter. Got a 2-tone band. So it's PVD coated, black and stainless steel. And then the Ice Panda version that I got is a limited production. Although they're making 10,000 models, so I don't know how limited that is, but they are numbered, which is cool. So mine's actually numbered 8,199 out of 10,000. So
Matt, you bring up a point. I think last podcast I was talking about when I went over to pick up a watch. When we were talking about that one Queen. I think either I was talking on the podcast or I was doing it on our group. But Seiko has quite a lot of automatic watches made in Japan that are limited production. If you go on their website. Not the Seiko USA, but just the Seiko. There's a lot of limited, and they look like, when I was at the store, I picked up a watch and I thought it was going to be like a $500 watch. It was $4,000 for a diver watch.
Wow.
And then I looked at another one.
We're in the limited economy now.
Yeah. And
everything is limited edition.
Yeah. So I was kind of impressed that they had a lot of stuff that I have never seen, but I went looking. I was at a pretty high-end jewelry store, and I went and I was like, "What do you have for $500?" Like somewhere in that print, and they had 2 watches under $500. So I was like, "Okay."
Yeah. Listen, I love the JDM versions. It's a little tricky if you ever need them serviced because you can't send them to like a regular. I mean, you can take them to a regular guy, but you can't send them back to like Seiko USA for servicing.
Why is that?
They should have the same. They should have the same movements, though.
They should. They should. And they do the same movements. For whatever reason, if you have a JDM version, they even tell you that you cannot send them to Seiko USA.
Okay.
Now you can send it to an independent guy. That's no big deal. But they don't accept them at now. That's what I've read online. I haven't tried myself because I haven't needed to service any of those yet. But I have 2 JDM models. My Hulk and my my Great White, both were JDM only versions that I bought from, one of those Japanese sites with the conversion, yen to US dollar and everything. So I love the Japanese stuff from overseas.
Well, I'll have to find that out as well because I need that time sonar to be serviced. And if there's a 3-month wait on anybody stateside, then maybe I'll just try this.
No, we have a place for you, James. We already know somebody that will do the service because he was going to do mine.
Plus when you get into that vintage stuff, it's a different story than maybe something.
Yeah, the vintage stuff that it'll get serviced. There's a guy that James and I know.
Okay, all right.
So he'll do it. There is a lot of long wait with any of these vintage, no matter where you go. I just saw another guy.
A local guy.
I think even then, I mean, they can only do so many watches. Like I saw a post of a friend, he had a Willard. And I was like, oh man, the kid's young. And I was like, yeah, that's a nice Willard, blah, blah, blah. He waited like 6 months for him. And all he did is beat up. I mean, this watch is beat up, but I don't know. Maybe he's like another James and likes stuff beat up. But he went in and serviced it and had the original band. And he waited 6 months to get it serviced, like WWI or something like that. It was the name of the company. And I told him about our guy, James, which we'll probably have him on our podcast. Hopefully, maybe one day.
Oh, nice.
Sweet. Cool, that'd be awesome. Yeah, that'd be
one
great.
Day.
Casey, what are you drinking tonight?
The main glass or the main cup is just a Truly tonight because we have a plethora of bourbons to talk about. I couldn't get too deep into it since I got to actually do some educating.
Yes, that sneak peek. We're going to be doing some bourbon talk tonight, which is awesome. And Mr. James,
Diet Coke.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, listen, so all kidding aside, Friday I have my annual physical. Not concerned about it, but I've got to do something, man. I got to freaking lose some weight. So I'm drinking Diet Coke tonight as well. I gotta cut some calories.
That's exciting. You're gonna get your annual physical, the annual glove.
The finger, dude. Yeah. Man, when you listen, but this
Something
doctor
to look forward to.
So I have a female doctor. I love female doctors.
Small
fingers.
Yes.
Long fingers.
Listen, she has been on my ass, no pun intended, for 2 years now to get a freaking colonoscopy, right? And every year she writes me a script, and every year I said, okay, I'll get it done, and I haven't done it yet. So I know freaking on Friday she's gonna be like, did you do that yet? I'm like, no.
What kind of doctor are you guys going to, man? You go to the doctor to check your PSA levels. If it's not no more, they're not even going to do a finger check for you guys.
No, I'm joking. I haven't had a finger check in years. Although, no, all kidding aside, man, I had a guy, Dr. Schmid. So true story. Had a doctor here local to where I'm at, old school doctor. This guy still made house calls and everything. It was someone that my wife's family had been using since she was little kids. Yeah, man, little kids, super nice guy. But, and it's kind of a sad story, but I literally went down. This would have been maybe, I don't know, 5 years ago. And he was old school everything, so I went and had my physical and I got the finger. And literally the next day, Stacy calls me. She says, "Hey, it's all over the news. Dr. Schmidt committed suicide." And I said, "Well, goddamn! I hope his finger up my ass didn't make him do that." So we had to find new doctors.
Wow.
So
okay, well, hard to top that.
Yeah, wow. Top that, Casey. Go ahead, buddy.
I cannot.
So we talked to Casey. Alluded to it.
Well, James, what are you drinking?
It's dry January, so I am taking a month off. And I am drinking water, so staying hydrated. So may have to take a break here.
There's nothing wrong with that.
I don't respect it.
That's okay.
So Casey's our resident bourbon expert, and I don't know a whole lot about bourbon at all. These guys know a lot more than I do, but we wanted to kind of go over and touch base and really talk about what makes a whiskey a bourbon or what makes a bourbon a bourbon. And so Casey's going to kind of educate us and give us a little knowledge tonight.
Hey, and also what makes a whiskey a rye?
Right.
A rye whiskey.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, all of that. So that question gets asked all the time, right? It's usually one of the first questions when somebody hears that, hey, you're into bourbon. What is a bourbon? So there's 5 general rules, and they're pretty basic. And as I was trying to do some research furthering my education, so I don't sound like an idiot, there's some things that I don't know if by law they are added, but it seems that some people have added some additional kind of rules. I don't know how true they are, so I'm not going to say them. But these are the 5 basic ones. First, it's got to be at least 51% corn. It's got to be majority corn. It has to be aged at least 2 years.
Okay.
It's got to be aged in a new oak barrel, any type of oak, but an oak barrel. No additional flavors added, and it's got to be made in the US of A. Those are the 5 basic rules.
So, okay, coming from a guy that's not a big bourbon drinker, I know one that we talk about, you have hints of tasting with vanilla and caramel and all that. So that's those
it's all the
flavors
wood.
Are natural. It's all from the wood. There's
right.
no Okay.
Yep. The percentage I hear is usually 80%, something like that, of the flavor of bourbon comes from the wood. You've got the corn. There's some companies or distilleries that are putting out kind of what specific strain of corn they're using, and you can kind of taste some differences there. But mainly, it's the time and the age. The time in the barrel and the weather conditions that the barrel sees. And that's why you see a lot of this bourbon. It's the best bourbon, I think, comes from Kentucky, but there's reasons why. But one of the reasons is the climate. You can have a rick house that's maybe down in a valley up on top of a hill. Kentucky's got, the rolling bluegrass, right? And so down in the bottom of the valley, you're going to get some colder temperatures, even during the summer. The cold air will fall into the valley and you'll cool those rick houses to a greater level. Up on top of the hills, oftentimes you'll have more wind. The temperature won't drop as low in the summertime. And so those differences will change the amount of liquor that goes into the wood and is contracted out of it, right? So the more the wood, the bourbon moves in and out of that wood, how deep it goes, how long it stays before it's pushed back out, all that imparts flavor into your bourbon.
Is there a minimum time it has to be in a barrel for a bourbon?
2 years. To be called a bourbon, a straight bourbon specifically, 2 years in the barrel. If it's under 2 years, you're whiskey. And then over 2 years, there's no restriction. As we know, like Old Pappy is Van Winkle stuff is really pushing the limits of aging. And they're really the only ones that are, at least on a big scale that I can think of off the top of my head that are putting bourbon away for 15, 20, 23 years. At least the time, because a lot of people, myself included, really get over oaked and don't like that kind of tannin, oaky, super oaky flavor. It loses a lot of that sweetness.
So you went over 2 rules. Corn, 2 years
51%.
51%. What's the other ones?
It had to be a new barrel, right? It has to be a brand new barrel.
New barrel, right?
And USA.
This
USA,
is
okay.
So not Kentucky, though?
Nope, it's a USA product. Kentucky, Indiana, Tennessee, the Ohio River Valley. You can look across the country, and that's really where the best bourbon comes from. Although Texas is really coming up and producing a lot of good stuff. I've got a bottle from Wyoming that's really good stuff. New York is producing some really good bourbon. So there's other places that are producing.
New York City.
Yeah. Finger Lakes. They're producing some good bourbon.
And I think a lot of people thought that, like James just alluded to, it had to be in Kentucky. I thought that as well, like early on, like you had to have it. Bourbon had to be in Kentucky, but
so is that propaganda? Was that the marketing tool in Kentucky to keep it?
And originally it was, at least the stories go, that it's originally a Kentucky product because the whiskey was obviously a form of currency, right? Using the corn. And they would send it down to Louisiana, okay, to New Orleans. And so the barrels that would come from Kentucky would generally be older because it had a longer way to come down the river. And so they started calling it Kentucky whiskey, etc. Nobody really knows where the name bourbon came from. There's lots of different kind of legends and stories about it, but there's no, confirmed answer. But the story is that it comes down the river. It takes longer. People are noticing that it has a different color. The flavor is different than standard like White Lightning moonshine. And they start asking for Kentucky whiskey, and then it kind of turns into Kentucky bourbon. And
that kind of goes with a lot of liquors, though. I mean, you think about, stereotypes. You think of rum, you think of the Caribbean. You think of vodka, you think of Russia. You think of, moonshine, you think of the Southeast or the South. So, I guess that's kind of normal that with certain liquors, you associate a region or an area.
And I think also, too, because, like, technically Champagne's supposed to be from the Champagne, France.
France,
Cognac's supposed to be from Cognac, France. What about rye? Off the top of your head? The difference between rye and
rye, off the top of my head, it is majority rye rather than corn.
Okay.
I don't know the exact percentage. I'm sure I can look it up here real quick. But it's just going to not be majority corn. Here, rye, 51% rye. So that kind of goes right in line. But rye is usually in all your bourbons, or most of the bourbons anyhow, just lower percentage. You'll see them in 30%, 20%, all those mash bills. And then you have a little bit of malt, and that's generally for the pH balance, I believe, for the sour mash. So the malt's usually like 5%, but you got like 4 grains now that increase that percentage, and you got some people experimenting and stuff now. So it's as the bourbon market is back to kind of an expanding mode, you get lots of different stuff. The other kind of profile that people are generally aware of is Tennessee whiskey, like your Jack Daniels. The difference there is that they do cold filtering, which is running the post-aged bourbon through maple charcoal. And that'll take a lot of the impurities out of it. It changes the flavor. It's no longer, I think I have some bottles. Jack Daniels uses a quote Tennessee whiskey on their bottle. There, I think, is some still up in the air on whether or not you can technically call it a bourbon or not, because that charcoal will impart flavor. And obviously one of the rules is you cannot add any additional flavor. So that's kind of the different thing about Tennessee whiskey. And they're trying really hard to coin that now and put that as their marketing thing. You got Kentucky bourbon, Tennessee whiskey, and they are even adding to the Kentucky Bourbon Trail spots in Tennessee now to really kind of fill up that corridor there with more kind of whiskey tourism.
And it's very expensive to do bourbon because it takes so long, like 2 years minimum, right? So
it's extremely cash heavy, and no one really drinks 2-year bourbon. Bourbon's really, yeah. I guess they won't be a sponsor.
Unless you're using it as a mixer.
4 years really where it starts to turn. 5-6 year, you really start to get the real flavors. You've got some of the historical brands that will put a lot of 4-year stuff in their bourbon because they're going to
mix
volume.
it, right?
Yep. Yeah. But they'll impart some maybe 6 and 8 year stuff to bring out some of that good flavor and hold down some of that grainy, young.
So when you read a bottle and it says it's a blended bourbon or is blended, is that what it means? It's blending different ages, or
it can be, right?
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring some of this up. Sorry,
I didn't mean to jump ahead.
No, that's okay. Because the TTB is very, very specific on the wording and the language that goes onto a bourbon bottle or their label. Okay. And so I have several bottles here to walk through because it's very important because historically, right, it's got to be, it's been a legislated and protected word, bourbon or straight bourbon. And so there's requirements. As we said, like if it's charcoal filtered or the Lincoln County process, it's called, it's probably a Tennessee whiskey. Okay. Then you have things like, take Angel's Envy. A lot of people will say, hey, this is one of my favorite bourbons. This is not bourbon. This has bourbon, or it was bourbon, but it is now a whiskey specialty. Okay. It had bourbon that's been secondarily barreled for whatever length of time. And on the label, this is actually one of the areas that the TTB has not really defined well, the secondary barreling process of what the label has to say. But Angel's Envy specifically says Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey. We understand that. Finished in port wine barrels, this specific one. It's a great whiskey, but it's not necessarily or it
But
should not.
it does say bourbon on it though.
Because it does, but then it has what it was finished in, and that's where people, it's no longer bourbon once it's been flavored, right? That's in the basic rules.
Right.
And you or I have argued till I'm blue in the face that words have meanings and words mean something specific, and when it's finished, it falls out of the definition of what a bourbon is.
What's TTB?
The tax and the government agency, Tax and Trade Bureau, and they govern all the labels, what has to be on there.
Oh, okay.
It's the man. The man is always keeping everything down, man.
That's right.
Okay.
Let me see. This is a Davies County straight bourbon whiskey. And then Matt, you were asking, this one specifically says that it's a blend of two different mash bills.
Okay.
All right. Not everybody will say that, but this one specifically has that on the label. I think more information is better. Then we have Pursuit United, which I've brought up on here before. It's a blend, and it says explicitly that it's a blended whiskey. And on the back, they will actually tell you where the whiskeys are from and their mash bill. They don't tell you the percentage, but they'll tell you where they're from and their mash bill. Specifically, this has Kentucky, Tennessee, New York. Kentucky is, who do they use? Bardstown Bourbon Company. The New York is Finger Lakes. The Tennessee, they are contractually not allowed to tell you where it's from. And honestly, I don't know. I haven't figured that one out. But they do tell you the mash bill.
Now, isn't Bardstown a blended bourbon as well?
Bardstown Bourbon Company makes a blended whiskey. Yes. Okay. The whole Discovery series that they have, which is awesome. I had that we talked about that one evening here. But that's but yes, it is a blended whiskey as well. Then we have some Rabbit Hole.
So let me ask you a question.
Sorry.
So if they're saying that they're putting a whiskey from Bardstown, right? On that one bottle that you just said, that could be a blend of a whole bunch of different whiskeys.
I guess in theory it could. It is not. They tell you explicitly what the mash bill is. You can go on their site. It's not actually on this.
So
bottle.
They do make their own straight bourbon.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. They do. I don't know if I can't think of the name, what their actual label is called that has their straight whiskey in it. Okay. But they also, Bardstown Bourbon Company purchased Green River, and Green River has their own label out just called Green River. And they have a standard bourbon and a wheated bourbon that is really good. But here's rabbit.
So how much importance do you think a typical bourbon drinker or whiskey drinker is looking at these labels and making the decisions solely on that, especially when there's a lot of the word games as far as what it's made up of? Is it, or do you think it's just, oh, I've heard this is good, I'm going to grab it?
I think,
or somebody like you, I think it would be more important that has the knowledge. I would definitely
say that I'm a very niche consumer. You know, the 0.01% of bourbon drinkers. I listen to bourbon podcasts. You know, I'm willing to talk about it. I read about bourbon. So no, I wouldn't say that I'm normal. I think the normal consumer goes and finds a label that they recognize, something they saw or had at a bar, a pretty bottle. I think that's important. I think that's why Angel's Envy.
That's universal. That doesn't just mean for bourbon and whiskey. That's universal.
Yeah. And then cost. I think cost plays a big role into it. The taters out there will also almost play the reverse of the cost, that anything that costs more must be better. Right. And specifically, I'll use this as the greatest example I know of off the top of my head is Elmer T. Lee. Elmer T. Lee is historically a $30, $35 bottle of bourbon that I used to buy at CVS and would pound it with Coca-Cola all through college.
And cough syrup.
Yes. And that bottle now is a $300 to $400 bottle.
Same one.
That same bottle. Only because it's, quote, hard to find. because they just don't produce very much of it. It's not that good. It's not.
Wow.
It's $30 bottle good. I mean, it's a fine mixer. You can drink it straight, but it's not special, and it sure as hell is not $300 or $400 worth.
Wow.
So here is a going more about the label. The Rabbit Hole Kentucky Straight Bourbon Whiskey, but no age statement, right? That's also important. We'll get to another one here in a second. They do have on the back, which you won't be able to read, but they have a minimum age statement of 3 year. So they're using at least 3 year bourbon in that. But they don't tell you obviously the percentage or how much of any aged product that they have in there. More straight, just bourbon whiskeys, Turkey 101, all the same mash bill. Unlike the Davies County that tells you they have two different mash bills, this is all one mash bill. Then we have, say, Old Louisville. And this is where you get into where reading the label can prevent you from overpaying for bourbon, because you have sourcing, right? You have a ton of new labels. You go to the liquor aisle now, and it is full of labels that you've never seen or heard of, which is good. Bourbon's expanding. But what these companies do is all these people don't have license to distill their own product, nor have they had the time to distill their own product, right? We're talking at least 4 years to get a palatable product. So they're sourcing their bourbon. It's a fine thing to do. The biggest sourcing company would be MGP out of Indiana, okay? Or if you've heard of Remus Bourbon, that's MGP, okay? That's their in-house brand. They also call it Squib and something. Anyhow, so reading the back label where it has to, by law, say where it was distilled and bottled in, you can see in here, if I can get in front of the camera, it says it's distilled in Indiana, bottled in Louisville. That's important. It does not have to tell you the distillery in which it was distilled, but if it was Indiana, you can almost 99% say it was MGP.
So when you're making a blend, not to interrupt, but when you're making a blend, a company's making a blend, are they literally taking, like marrying two, or are they putting it through a process?
Two barrels or?
Yeah, like two or three or.
Yeah, if you're making something like Pursuit United, where you are taking three different barrels, but in this specific case, three different mash bills, so three different flavor profiles, they're experimenting all the way down and you almost like a chemist and mixing. Hey, I want 2 more drops of this. What's the overall percentage of bourbon 1, bourbon 2, bourbon 3, and they're coming up with their blend. But yes, then they're taking it to a massive mixing tank, mixing it, and then bottling.
Because if you put it in a barrel, if you do anything to it to add flavor to it, again, then it's not a bourbon.
It's
correct.
whiskey.
Correct.
And even if you were to distill it even more, then the alcohol content would change as well.
Correct.
Or even leaving it in a barrel, taking it and putting it in a barrel again, your content.
Which we would call that double oaked, right? You got like the Woodford double oaked or whatever. Putting it into a second new oak barrel is double oaking.
Okay.
And yeah, that's James's favorite. And then here's
real quick. So doing the double oak, the double barrel, that is to essentially give it an additional age, right? Instead of having it sit longer.
Well, it depends on the barrel, and it depends on how long. You can make a young bourbon, say a 2-year-old bourbon, and double oak it, put it into a second oak barrel, and it will add sweetness. It'll add that oaky, sweet oak flavor to it. So you can take a potentially unpalatable bourbon.
Yeah, that's to give it an older taste.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Just to speed up the process.
Yes. So
Can you take a barrel, a bourbon, dump all the stuff out, or say and use, it has to be new, right? So you couldn't take a bourbon, say a 2-year bourbon, put it into a we'll say a
This
Pappy
is a
barrel.
SAT question, by the way. This is
I know. I'm
this
asking
is a word
Yeah.
problem.
and pour that into it because that does have to be a new barrel to be bourbon.
So at that point, it's going into the same territory that Angel's Envy is in,
oh, okay.
and it's going into just a secondary barrel, and it would be bourbon that's been secondarily barreled, so it would
Flavored.
be a specialty product.
Okay.
Wow.
Drinking
this water sucks right now.
whether it's a old Pappy barrel, which you could, some would say, or I think even the scientists would say, the distillers will say that the bourbon takes all those sugars out of the barrel. And so if you took like a 10-year-old barrel and put new bourbon into it, the amount of flavoring, let's just call it flavoring, that they're going to get from that barrel is going to be minimal. So I doubt that that's something you'd want to do. Whereas when like Angel's Envy takes, what do they take, like tequila barrels or something else? Somebody takes some tequila barrels, or you can use rum barrel or whatever you're doing. Those things aren't aged in those barrels for very long. So you can take those barrels and still get more flavoring out of it because they didn't sit in there for 6 years.
What about charring the inside of the barrel?
That is typically
Whiskey.
No. So to be, there is a specific char level that you have to hit in order for it to be, to fall into the qualification of the new oak charred barrel. I don't know the char level well enough to say exactly what that char level is. There are distilleries experimenting with different char levels to give it different profiles, especially in the second barrel, or you have like Maker's Mark that are doing all the different staves, what is it called? Maker's 46. They're doing staves.
Dropping those into the barrel, right? And that's what you're saying? Yeah.
Correct. And there's new technologies where you can age bourbon in, or at this time it would be called whiskey, but age the whiskey in like a stainless steel vat.
Right.
And then use wood cubes, drop in wood cubes. And it can, the surface area is such that the bourbon still moves in and out of the wood and flavors it. But it's not technically a bourbon because the confines of the language say that it has to be a new oak barrel.
And we talked about that a bit with Defiant here in North Carolina. Yeah.
Right. And then other things, just again,
Matt's going, what's going on?
No. But I was thinking, so when I see something like, a 12-year bourbon versus a 2-year bourbon, and obviously there's a major price differential. Is it because when they age it for 12 years, you have so much evaporation, you get less out of the barrel? Is that
100%?
Twofold. Number one is, yes, there's evaporation. There's the angel share, right? And you can look it up, but each year like a 7-year bourbon loses something like 40% or something of the barrel. Something it's wild.
Wow,
and so the older it gets, it's a significant drop in product. Wow. Secondly, Kentucky has a fucking ridiculous tax law that you are taxed per gallon per year that the bourbon is in the rick house.
Wow.
So you're starting to see a lot of distilleries that will, this is a loophole. Of course, there's always a loophole, right? That will distill in Kentucky, will age right across the border in Indiana, Tennessee, Ohio, wherever, for, say, 6 years, bring it back to Kentucky and age it for 1 calendar year. And now you have a Kentucky straight bourbon.
And is it going to be less because it's aged for 6 years and it's only half of the barrel? Because you're doing it on the gallons, right? So they're only paying taxes on half of it.
You're only paying taxes on that 1 year, correct, that it is in the state and whatever that volume is.
Right.
So they save an astronomical amount of money. It costs a lot to build a rick house over the border and transport, and that's a lot of work and effort. But the amount of taxation that Kentucky brings in is massive, and these distillers are getting wiser. I should say huge companies, conglomerates now are wising up because there's so many bourbon barrels now, and we are not near the height of the popularity of bourbon that we were at, in the 60s. So it's going to
Which is
become
amazing.
more prevalent. Yeah.
Wait,
Yeah.
so there was
So-
more bourbons in the 60s than there was?
Not more bourbons, but
Consumption.
more
More
consumption.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I don't
Oh,
think
yeah.
we've hit 50% of the consumption of the 60s.
That's amazing. So what would you consider the sweet spot in aging, Casey?
I would say 6 years, probably 4 to 6
Okay.
years. Yeah, I think in the most of the bourbons that I drink, a lot of them are not age stated, so you can't be definitive on what it is. But the people that's got these much better palates than myself, you can read on like Breaking Bourbon or whatever, and they are usually really good at estimating the age of their bourbon, and it's 4 to 6. That's where the money is.
So we shouldn't fall for the over that age, the 10-year, 12-year.
I don't think that you should pay outrageous prices for it. No, I think that say you have, if you could find an 8-year stated wild turkey, that's
Nice.
a hell of a bottle. Okay, this is from the 80s, and that was a different bourbon back then, or not the 80s. I think this is the 90s. I don't want to lie. But
So there's a
anyhow,
flavor change sitting in the bottle? Because, you can have a 8-year, but it could be 18 years old because it's been in your grandma's basement.
it does not age once it's put into glass, right? It's no longer in contact with the barrel. And as long as it's sealed well and kept out of like sunlight, it should be just fine. As long as it has a quality cork.
So the sweet spot is to have it aged long enough that you have a good flavor profile, but not aged so long that you have to hawk your car to buy a bottle.
Yeah. And
Fair enough.
I think it's also, what your palate enjoys. There's people that love super oaky, tannic bourbon, and that's all well and good. I'm not one of those. I like sweeter stuff in general. So I tend to go for the 4 to 6 years. I think that's 8 years stuff. It's really good. I've got some, say, like Elijah Craig 11, 12-year bottles. I think their 8 and 9-year stuff is better. Back when Elijah Craig was age stated as a 12-year, the flavor profile was different. I loved that bottle, but for whatever reason, it's different now. Perhaps they've had to expand and the aging locations have changed, so the profile is different. But I think the Elijah Craig 11-year that I have is not as good as like the 8-year.
And then you get into the different flavors based upon the years too, like you would champagne or wine as well. So what? Because of the seasons, isn't that like this was a colder season, this was a hotter season? Isn't that also like or it's not that much like it is wine?
It's not, to my understanding or education on the subject, that you're not going to have, say, a 99 Old Forester is the best year Old Forester, and the 2003 Old Forester really came down or was better. What you do see is basically 1990-ish, somewhere in there, those bourbons, which are often called like Dusties now, those bourbons will be different for a magnitude of reasons. One of the big reasons is you have the law about what the alcohol percentage of barreling went up. Okay, so it used to be 120, it's now 125, and so it can go into the barrel more with more alcohol, which is going to change its interactions. We also are changing the corn. That's different. You can say but the biggest thing from like modern bourbon and old bourbon is the old growth oak trees.
Okay.
And this is where it's we can't go back at this point. All the old growth oak is gone, and so we're all on this new oak. And the amount of rings it has, how quickly we can grow the trees now. So you get these oak trees that have 10-year tree, and the lines are like super far apart. That changes the structure of the internals, and it changes the interaction. Whereas these old growth oaks are super, super tight rings, and that changes how the how the bourbon moves in and out of the wood. I happen to know a gentleman that works for Beam at the University of Kentucky, and that's his main field of study, is studying how we can how can we get those old flavor profiles out of these new trees?
So they don't have, there's not, I don't even know how to say this without coming across like an asshole. The guy, like kind of like how we sometimes are with Porsches, the guy that says, oh, this 1982, there was a drought and the corn didn't, because you know how corn doesn't, wasn't as moisture content, and this was, they get into the corn, they get into, and then it's out in the season, they had a 3-year drought in Kentucky, so they don't really get into that.
No, I've never heard someone try to talk about bourbon that way. I won't claim to say that somebody doesn't try to, but corn's harvested every year. And who knows, how long and what was mixed once it gets into the actual barrel. And then from that barrel, you've got 4 to 6 years that's been blended together.
Yeah, plus where you're sourcing it, right?
Correct.
Right.
One rick house is 100 miles away from another rick house. And you're telling me that the corn, which is maybe, 20% of the flavor profile up front. And by the time it gets to the end product, what is the percentage of corn? How influential is that? And, there is some like white corn, there's bloody butcher corn, there's blue corn. There are people experimenting with different corn strains. I'm not deep enough to go in the closet. I know I have a bloody butcher corn, but I don't think I
saw
have
that on Netflix,
versions.
by the way.
The bloody butcher.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that the different corn strains on, say, a 6-year bourbon are that overly influential. I could be proven wrong.
Because since you guys know I drink a lot of Jack Daniels, and I know that's one of the things they do talk about is the season of, like, they had a cold winter, and that cold winter made it, I guess, maybe that it didn't, the barrels constricted, or the barrel was tight. Then when it was, because they char their barrels, or maybe when they had a summer super hot, it opened up those pores, so you got more flavor.
I completely agree with that, but I don't know that there's been any research, or at least publicized research. The individual distilleries probably have that data and have probably temperature gauges throughout the rick houses and monitor that stuff.
Because they move them, don't they? Move the barrels from the back to the front and stuff like that as well.
There are some distilleries that do that, and there are some that do not.
Okay.
Because rotating barrels, think of the amount of the labor that would be involved in doing that. That's a huge amount of work. Most of them will keep the barrels where they are, and they'll take, the bottom and the top, blend them together, and, maybe the middle level is its own line. You do have some, say this Old Forester, that they put on their rick houses and their level that they come from. This is a single barrel, so you can know exactly. But I think a lot of that is turning into the new marketing,
right.
Hot marketing.
But the other point is why would you want to decipher for your buying audience that one is better than the other? You just want the consistency every time. So every Jack bottle you drink is exactly the same.
But I would disagree with that.
The expectation is.
I see a lot of people that drink, well, I shouldn't say. I know people that when they do a barrel tasting, they'll go and they pick the one that was in the back of the, what do you call it?
Rick house, yeah.
Rick house. One in the front, one here. And that's when they pick that, they usually will say, oh, this was here. And I've seen some labels where they actually it charge more because of where it was placed. Like you just said, the center row or the back or the front.
I think a lot of that comes from the overhyping of a particular run that happened to come from the southwest corner of Rickhouse C.
Right.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of emphasis put on the bottles that like win awards in like San Francisco or the Ascots or whatever. And a lot of times the bourbons that are sent there are single barrels. So, you know, the distilleries know how to taste, and they go tasting all these things because they know if they win and it's labeled as, take the Henry McKenna that won several years ago, you can't fucking find that Henry McKenna anymore. And it was like two barrels that tasted that way. It goes and wins like a billion awards. And Fred Middick comes out and he's like, oh man, this is fabulous. And now you can't find it.
Right.
So I think it is becoming a marketing hype to say, you know, what rick house or what part of the rick house. But I think the majority, when you go buy a wild turkey, you want it to taste like wild turkey.
Mm-hmm.
You want it to be the flavor that you know and love and can count on. And perhaps if you're some up and coming brand, you know, Rabbit Hole or Pursuit or whatever, and you cherry pick, it can really help you.
You want the classic wild turkey, not the new wild turkey.
Oh yeah, if you can find a classic wild turkey, that's hard to find though.
So I got a question for you. So I know you mentioned it has to be a new barrel.
Mm-hmm.
You said it has to be oak. It can't be any other wood.
Correct. Oak.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
And so you have people secondarily barreling with like different oats, French oak, or they'll advertise it as, you know, French oak. Amburana is a popular second barrel, which I have not had, but they say it adds like a lot of like cinnamon and.
Yeah. I was just curious if they made a barrel, say out of maple or something like that. If it, you know, what it would do. So.
No, but Knob Creek, don't they put in second barrel of maple? But no, it needs to be an oak barrel to be bourbon. Unless it's secondarily barreled, and you can put it in, I don't know. You can put it in a cactus barrel if you wanted to. I just don't know if it would taste good.
Yeah. So now you should may or may not know the difference. What's the difference between, say, bourbon or American whiskey and, like, say, a Scotch whiskey? You know, I was gifted a bottle of Johnny Walker Black Scotch, which I have not drank, but I don't know what's the difference. Yeah.
So first, Scotch whiskey is made in one location, just like bourbon is American. Mm-hmm. Scotch is made in Scotland. Secondly, Scotch is all blended whiskey. So they just take all the whiskey that they make and they blend it all together to get that profile that you know and understand.
Okay.
The third kind of big difference is the amount of time that it's aged. And it's important because a lot of those are 18 year, 20 year, 23 year, the older, the better,
like
right?
10, 12 and above.
Yeah, right. And that's atypical for bourbons, or for the vast majority of bourbons. But think of the temperatures and the conditions that are in Scotland versus say Kentucky. It doesn't get near as hot. Cooler. So that that bourbon does not move into the wood as far. So you need more time for it to move in and out.
The whiskey, you mean, because it's not bourbon.
Correct. I'm sorry. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
And then they use smoke peat or the peat.
The peat, I think, is a flavor profile. I don't know if they actually use any of that in there, but they do. It is very oaky, or like smoky, and
because I've seen them in like
they do
show
florals as well. I've seen they do floral
the
profiles and all kind of stuff. You know.
Yeah.
So what are they doing when they're taking the peat and they're moving the peat and it's got like condensation in it, and I guess we'll have to do some research on that.
Yeah, I don't know that answer. I honestly am not real fond of Scotch. So
this is a bourbon episode, not Scotch.
That's right. Yeah. I drink one a year for my father, and that's about
it. So the same video. You remember last year, I texted you guys a picture of my vendor that brought me a whole, handle of Johnny Walker Black. I love him to death. He comes from India. He brought me another one this year. So now I have 2 handles of Johnny Walker Black, and I haven't even cracked it.
Tell him to step up and get the blue next time.
There you go.
Yeah.
Smoky.
So, wow, guys. Well, that was awesome.
What else? Is there anything else, Casey, on the bottles? Or I know that you have a chock full of them there.
Yeah, I think that you should, if you're into bourbon or like bourbon, the next time you go, you should take some time and read the labels and at least start to understand like what it is that you're actually buying and what it is you actually like. And not just willy-nilly choose a bottle or
Mm-hmm.
just go for makers because you bought it every time.
See, I need to do a tasting or something, because from the guy that doesn't drink a lot, no, well, don't get me wrong. I used to drink heavily, but lately I don't drink a lot. I've never really drank a lot of bourbon. I mean, I've drank a lot of whiskeys, I
Mm-hmm.
mean, tons of, Maker's Mark and, stuff like that and everything back in the day. Southern Comfort, whiskeys, but not a lot of bourbon. But
Makers is a bourbon.
Is it? Okay. So then I have it a bourbon, but I just wouldn't know what I would like,
And I think most of the time it's from going out to eat. Like James and I, we've gone places, and what's that, Jailhouse, I think we went to.
Mm-hmm.
Unless most places only have 2, maybe at 5 bourbons, if they have,
Mm-hmm.
and it's going to be makers, it's going to be the main. You really have to find out, I think, what you enjoy. You're good, because most makers, Angel's Envy, I can
Jim
name
Beam.
Jim Beam.
Yeah.
There's 5,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that's what they push. Unless you're going to a place that has,
Or
which they're
distribute.
hard to find.
Easy
They're hard to
distribution.
find. So I think Matt, or anybody who wants to
Mhm.
take some time to maybe go to a place that specializes in bourbons, and a lot of times they'll let you have a little taste of this, little taste of that. And do you believe in adding water, Casey, to it? I just saw a thing on I don't know, some Instagram. The guy was adding water to it, and he said
you said
that's what I texted you. Remember, I texted the group.
31% for the optimal, I guess, palate.
No, the best was the sniff. He put the whole cup in his.
But do you believe in adding water?
I don't. When I'm tasting it, I just want to taste it neat, and I want it to be like roughly room temperature. I like the Glencairn, the goofy little glass.
Those are great.
Think that I do think that you can smell well out of it, because it really funnels it up to your nose. Listening to the likes of Fred Minnick and the other guys like him, I've learned to sniff and smell better. Learn how to smell, because there is a difference in how you do it. If you smell different out of one nostril versus the other, open mouth, it changes on what you've had to eat, prior. And I think, honestly, it depends on your mood a lot of times too, or the kind of the mental state that you're in when you're tasting. And so I have bourbons that I disliked on my first tasting, but now really enjoy. I have no idea why.
Because your palate has changed. What, like smoking cigars, or?
Yep, it very well could just be a palate change. It could be what I ate dinner, ate prior, that I don't keep records of, right? I just go try a bourbon. But I do think that's why I like having a lot of bourbons, because I can go back and try them and taste them and play with them. And some nights I like everything I pick up. Some nights not so much.
Well,
wow.
But back to your point, Matt, I find that drinking bourbon, I'm able to tell the differences better than I could with microbrew beer or with wine. I just can't catch those differences as much as I can with bourbon. And but that's just for me, and that's
Well, I've never been a big straight liquor guy. I mean, I've always mixed everything. I mean, other than tequila shots or whatever like that, I've just never been a big just drinking straight vodka or anything. I've always mixed it with something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think I don't think mixing is bad, and if that gets you into it or to enjoy it with someone else, have an old fashioned, have a bourbon diet. Who cares?
Absolutely.
I think it's more about hanging out and doing it. But I think that my palate picks up very specific flavors, and outside of that kind of realm, I kind of lose focus or lose the being able to pinpoint like what I'm tasting. It becomes more like I like it, I don't like it, but I can taste like baking spice and kind of oatmeal or caramel, vanilla type flavors. But then past that, I'm still learning. And there's some cool kits out there now that are called smelling kits or something to that effect, where it comes with 24 different pure smells, and you can smell them and get your nose used to it. I also try when we're cooking dinner, I try to smell kind of everything to get my nose used to smelling raw vegetables or raw ingredients. In the morning, my coffee, I'll smell the beans, just the pure bean. Because I don't think we do that very much in normal everyday life. And I think it's hard to pick out specific flavors if you don't know what they actually are.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you've never actually smelled what pure vanilla smells like.
It's
or
very
caramel
chef-like, right?
Yeah.
And it changes the way that food tastes. Because, I
Absolutely.
mean, when we had all COVID, like, I lost my smell and food
exactly.
tasted disgusting. I was just chewing.
Yeah.
So do they make a bourbon home brew kit like they do microbrews?
You can go on Amazon and get yourself a copper still, little pot still, and you can do it.
I mean, if you know that's someone is missing the marketing. No, someone's missing the marketing. If they don't go through and produce like little 1 gallon barrels or something like that, you know, and I mean, granted,
they do.
Yeah. So someone could brew at home if they wanted to.
Yeah, and they age very differently, being in your house or on your back porch, the small barrels. But I have a terrible 2-year bourbon that I've been wanting to get a little mini barrel for and see if it'll turn into something palatable.
So that's a neat idea. That's a cool idea.
Before we call this a night, I want to tell you guys a funny story. So forever ago,
no fingers involved.
No. But forever ago, I was a manager at Home Depot. I worked at Home Depot from like 1993 until 2005. And so I was like 20 years old and I was the manager of the garden department. And of course we sold the whiskey barrels, all the used whiskey barrels, they take the whiskey barrels, they cut them in half and you sell them as planters and everything out in the garden department. And so inevitably it would happen at least once every couple months. It's Florida. You get a big rainstorm and one of those barrels would fill with water. And then a raccoon would come and start drinking the water a couple days later. And you have not lived until you've seen raccoons drunk as shit, falling all over the damn garden apartment at Home Depot. So
that's hilarious.
Yeah.
On that note,
you could. Well, when we get fresh, barrels in, man, dude, it's straight up. You can smell it.
Wow.
So.
Well, Casey, thanks,
guys.
Thanks for that.
Yeah,
that
thanks, man. It was
quite good.
It was very educational, especially from a guy who knew nothing about it. So I learned a lot tonight. So much so that we had another topic for tonight that we're going to save for next week because we're already an hour and a minute in. So, guys, for listening, thank you very, very much for listening. Again, catch us on YouTube. You can catch us on our website, whiskeywatchingwheels.com. Go to YouTube. Like our YouTube page. Subscribe. Even if you don't necessarily use YouTube, it helps us with their algorithm. So we're helping to grow that audience. If you're downloading, thank you very much. If you have comments or anything you want to get to us, email contact@whiskeywatchingwheels.com. You can go through and hit us up on Instagram. You can go through and comment on the YouTube if that's the way you view our content. So we're very appreciative of everything that we've gotten so far. We're 9 episodes in and we appreciate everyone listening. Guys, you got anything else for tonight?
No, just visit their website. Great. There's a couple blogs that Casey's written and we've written too. So check, if sometimes you forget, you can always go to the website too. And we have links on there as well.
Absolutely. So, all right, gentlemen. Well, we're going to call that an evening and we will catch you guys next week. All right.
Have a good one.
All right.
Later.
Peace out, guys. Later.